Hello, everyone. This is episode 30 of the Dresden Files podcast, a member of the Broken Jars Network. And today's going to be kind of weird and unusual a little bit. We have kind of a special guest, which is Jacob from Broken Jars and 42 and Great Scott and all that's brother, who's a priest and a Dresden Files fan. And he's going to help us discuss religion and the series. So, Jason, please introduce yourself to us by telling us your favorite 3 books and your favorite character.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, my favorite character, favorite books. We'll do that first. I think Skin Game is the first one that came to mind. I loved the heist movie feel of that one, and especially the Denarians and that fantastic father-daughter pathos of the 2 Denarians there towards the end. Death Masks, where the whole universe kind of finally gets opened up to us, and having read a lot of plotting fantasy where the author isn't quite sure where they're going to go until much later in the series, it was nice to feel like I had been systematically walked through 5 books where like an onion, the world had been opened up, and then changes. And poor Harry. That was the book where I wondered, what won't Butcher make Dresden go through? But those are my 3 favorite books. And my favorite character is a toss-up between Mac and Butters. Mac, because I've tended bar a little bit in my life, and it's fun to be on that side of things. And Butters, because he gets a freaking lightsaber.
Well, the other Alex has a rule. If you have to have 2 characters, you have to choose which one dies.
Yeah.
Oh, Mac will die heroically.
And I had to choose between Butters and Ebenezer, and I had to choose Butters to die.
Oh, okay.
All right. So if you can, introduce yourself a little bit more and help us ease into this topic. You are an Episcopalian priest. Can you explain what Episcopalianism is?
Sure.
And how it's different from others?
The Episcopal Church is the American branch of the Anglican Communion, which is just those churches that descend from the Church of England, which is the established church in England. And when the settlers came over, they brought the Church of England with them. But when the Revolution started in 1776, that church was cut off from its home in England and had to form itself, and eventually got reconnected, but as an independent church over time. Now, the Church of England is one of the early Reformation churches, so what makes us different, say, than the Roman Catholics is that in the 16th century, the Church of England basically went back to an earlier form of Christianity, or tried to, and said that the Pope has jurisdiction in Italy, but not in England, and we're going to continue doing Catholic Christianity with bishops, priests, and deacons, and liturgy and sacraments and all of those types of things, but without the leadership of the Church of Rome. So an Episcopal priest these days oversees a parish, a church, and we get involved in all kinds of different things. So we were one of the first churches to ordain women to the priesthood and to become bishops. We're currently doing a lot in terms of LGBTQ inclusion in religious life. And we're the people that, if you want to be Catholic, but can't make it all the way to Rome, this is a fantastic place to be a Christian believer today. And as for me, I mean, I'm the rector, the priest at Holy Spirit Episcopal Church in Waco, Texas, and lived for a few years in England before that. So I got to be in the mother church, Church of England, for a while, and Canada before that. Anyway, it's been a fantastic journey.
Awesome. So let's start with the Dresden part of this discussion, and let's just talk about faith magic and its mechanics, I guess. There's a difference between belief. Oh, yes, news. Thank you, Alex. We have some news. One is the announcements of, we're killing off all of our old website and iTunes and RSS thing, and so those will die on Halloween. And if you have not commuted onto the other things, then you need to, or else you won't get any more content. Also, there's some news of Jim will be doing some signings in Colorado, one of them on October 15th at Griffin Games and Comics in Fort Collins, and one of them is on October 27th at Barnes & Noble in Glendale. And that's, if you are in the area, you can totally go. And also Bedali Jewelry that we discussed in the last episode as being the official jeweler of Harry Dresden things is having a sale all of this month for Harry Dresden's birthday. So now let's get into Dresden religion mechanics stuff. So there's a faith magic, and then there's magic, and faith is separate from it. And let's try to do the more objective outside of Harry discussion before we get into how Harry thinks of it all.
So are you asking about how it seems to work in the series as a whole?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I get the impression of there's two different kinds of faith magic. There are wizards who cast magic and they use their faith to do it. And then there is humans having faith in something and thereby bestowing power upon it.
Yeah, and not all magic needs to have your religion in it, but some of it does. And
yeah, you can use magic like Harry does without religion at all. And there are others who are religious people where their magic is tied to it. They cannot do magic without having it tied to their faith.
Right. I mean, so the two distinctions I see is that, I mean, I share similar kinds of, upbringings and backgrounds with Butcher and where some of his ideas probably came from, and the whole that, D&D splits out faith magic and arcane magic, so to speak. And so you've got your difference between the wizard sorcerers, half of the pie, and then you've got your druids, your clerics, etc. But I mean, really where it comes down to is that faith magic comes from a higher power. There's literally somebody is powering that magic. It is not coming from them. It's their faith in that power that allows them to employ it. Whereas Michael doesn't cast a fireball by manipulating the elements. He, if there is any fire involved, it's presumably coming down from heaven or whatever the case would be if you were to do a similar kind of evocation there. Whereas like Harry has to have faith. You can't use any magic that you don't believe in. So there's a measure of faith involved there, but they're manipulating, elemental energies instead of necessarily directly, please God, cast this fireball at those goblins over there,
It seems to have this question of, is there a difference between belief and faith? Which it seems to be there's something, but it's hard to describe for me. Like, what is the real difference?
I wonder if in the just the mechanics of the series itself, if they're not actually two different things, it's just the object of attention that's important. Because I feel like Harry, in multiple times, thinks about his pentagram as an object of faith, right? It's something that this is what he believes in. He believes in order. He believes in the connection of all living things, and it's that faith that enables him then to manipulate the physical powers. But for Michael and Charity, when Harry experiences what he describes as faith magic with them, or the power of faith, it's the same kind of devotion that is just aimed at a different source and has different results. And then faith magic, like we've been talking about here, in terms of the magicians who do magic, is again a different kind of thing than what Charity and Michael do, but it still feels like the same intention, the same, not desire to serve, but the same trust, because that's what faith ultimately means, right? It's just trust in something, that something is going to work in a certain kind of way.
Did you just call the great and powerful wizards of the White Council magicians? I think they would take offense.
They just might. There's not a lot I could do that they wouldn't be offended by.
I mean, in order to cast a spell, you need to have belief that it will work. And if you don't have that certainty, it won't. But comparing it to faith in a higher power is kind of strange for me. So I'm trying to get a grip on it through the episode.
Right. Well, and that's one of the hard things, because I can't ever do anything but kind of lapse into Christian theology. But when faith in God is a type of the kind of faith that we have as a regular part of our lives. So if I trust my wife, if I have faith in my wife, faith in God is a very similar kind of thing, and not altogether different. It's just the object entailed, and that. So yeah, when it comes down to it, this kind of basic faith is something that all people have in different kinds of objects. But what makes the faith different or religious is the object to which it's pointed.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you say that. Around the time when I first started reading the Dresden Files books, I actually also visited Israel for 10 days. Wow. I went to Jerusalem. Well, not because of that. I don't know if you heard of the Birthright program. Where you can, if you can prove that you're Jewish, you can go to Israel for free for 10 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But so we visited Jerusalem, and I'm sure you're aware in Jerusalem is the Western Wall. It's like the most sacred place for Jews.
Right.
And it's hard to describe, but the idea that for 3,000 years, a group of people have been visiting the same place for the same reason, it was like I could feel a power there. And I'm not a religious person, but so my point is I think that organized religions, it makes sense in the context of the Dresden Files for organized religions to have more power resulting from that faith because there's so many people believing in the same thing versus Harry just believing that his pentagram is an object of faith. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, I think. I think it's funny with how Jason explains it with having faith in God. It's kind of like having faith in your wife or similar. That, Harry knows for a certain fact that the white God and the angels are real, yet he doesn't really have any belief or faith in them. I think that's pretty interesting. Like he knows God is out there, but he doesn't have faith in him.
And yet
that's
he
right.
has soulfire.
And yet he has soulfire.
Yet he has soulfire. They have faith in him, apparently.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the same predicament happens a lot in various fiction, like Constantine. The movie was great, and it's the same kind of problem. Like, but you don't believe. It's like awesome movie, but it still didn't help me in terms of talking about faith. But
well, yeah, and I think there's the thing about faith is that faith is always a personal relation, whereas belief or knowledge is something that's very impersonal. So I can believe all day long that Tunisia is a country in North Africa, and that has a certain kind of effect on me, but not the same kind of effect as the statement, I'm an American. One of them is a fact, and one of them is a fact that is so worked into my being. I have such a deeply personal relationship with that fact that it colors everything I do, regardless of whether or not it's conscious to me. And that kind of relationship, that faith relationship with whatever it is, your nationality or God or a pentagram, which connects you with your mother, it's the same kind of thing. Like, it colors who you are in this deeply personal way because you have this relationship with another being or another thing that completely changes everything that you do.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to bring up, because going back to the analogy about the wife, not to necessarily overuse it, but that she is your wife, but having faith in her is a completely different thing. One is a fact and one is a relationship to that fact.
Right.
So I think that's where that becomes a little bit more interesting, is that knowledge and ideas and facts, those are, concrete things, but having faith in the marriage and the relationship and knowing that when your wife goes out with her guy friends, she's not running around on you. That is a faith. That is a personal connection and a history with the object that is, your spouse, not to say that women are objects for the love of God, but anyway, but just to say that, a fact is that she is your spouse, or he or whatever in this case. So
exactly, and that speaks to the all the way downness of faith too, because when it comes down to it, you could not explain rationally that kind of faith to someone else, because you have it because of this long-standing relationship with a person you love, and other people might think you were crazy for trusting someone in that kind of relationship or in that kind of situation. But that's why faith becomes so tricky, because it's more than just accepting a set of facts about the world. It's about this deep relationship of trust that is formed over time. And so Harry can know that the white God exists all day long, but it takes something much different to have the kind of faith that Michael and Charity have in that same being. But so much, one of the hard things, and one of the things I love that they wrestle with in these series, is that in the United States of America, when we talk about faith, we tend to link belief in certain ideas with the trust relationship I'm talking about, and don't distinguish those enough to make them meaningful. So you get people who are like, well, I don't know if I believe that Jesus was raised from the dead on the third day. And the fact of the matter is that there are plenty of faithful Christians who go in and out of knowing whether or not they can believe that in terms of a proposition out there in the world. But the fact of the matter is that there's still this deep relationship of trust with the God that the resurrection teaches us about. And yes, and there goes my train of thought out the window.
Yeah, that happens. But, so, I mean, when I was developing these topics, I was starting to wonder, like, if Harry ever had faith in religion, would it change how he has to use his magic? Or not? Or if he just decided to use magic on faith instead of belief, the slight, tiny little difference, how would it change things for him?
That's a really good question, and one of the things that I wonder about, and if we get into the Bible's relationship with magic and divination and stuff, maybe we can get into some of the more theological aspects there. But it seems to me that the way magic is portrayed in the Dresden verse, you have it at least the way Harry practices it. It is almost a purely mechanical manipulation of forces. And if he were to get baptized, if he were to become a Christian, that would not change how he would have to. It would not change the mechanics of magic for him. It might change the meaning of those mechanics, in terms of he would all of a sudden see practicing magic as a participation in the work and being of God, because that's how Christians see all of creation, as a participation in the work and being of God. But it wouldn't necessarily change what he would have to do it. Now, it might mean that he stops using summoning circles, or there might be other parts of a new Christian faith that would limit what he does in certain ways. But I think just the sheer engineering style of magic that he uses is not incompatible with a Christian faith, or incompatible with the white God, as the white God is portrayed in the books.
So I want to interject for a moment. I want you to expand on that, because when you first wrote that, when we first made contact, I was really curious, especially from a priest perspective. There are plenty of Christians and even Protestants who definitely believe the whole "thou shalt," the witch, "thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," etc., and that sort of thing. So that's one of the things we want to talk about. But what I was thinking while you were talking about that there is that, Harry's magic is a kind of power. His faith isn't going to change that power. It would just change how he employs that power. And so, he would obviously, if anything, he would give up some of that power and start using more of the faith. Like you said, he would maybe stop using the summoning circle or use it in more different ways. He wouldn't necessarily, if he went with the whole thou shalt not kill thing all the way down and applied it to creatures of the Never Never, there goes his evocations. He's not going to just burn an ogre to the ground, right? But he still could. So it's the same kind of thing with a person and a weapon. I have a weapon. It doesn't change the ability that I can manipulate that weapon and I can cause harm. It does change what I believe about doing that and when I would employ that. Maybe it's only self-defense. Maybe it's never, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the way that magic is portrayed in the books, magic for Harry, for the most part, is a lot more like driving the Blue Beetle around than anything supernatural that impinges on other parts of his world. And it's only supernatural because people don't believe in it. But it seems like the point of it all is to say that magic is a deeply, deeply natural thing.
Yeah. It's a force
to be fair, in the Dresden verse, magic is only supernatural because people don't believe in it. Because it's clear that in that universe, it's just a fact of reality that the Never Never exists and people can do magic.
Right.
Well, and to crystallize it a little bit further, we actually even have a person who's done both. Charity was a practitioner, and then she gave up her magic. And that's what happened. She basically, they're two different things in a way. She gave up her power entirely, and that's what Michael wanted Harry to do when he was infected with Lashiel's shadow. He was to give up his power entirely, and then that doesn't stop him from, quote unquote, empowering, employing the power of faith. Because we could see in Charity's case, she definitely clearly still does that. But it's different enough in the Dresden verse that it's really like putting down an apple and picking up an orange. They are two separate physical things, the way that they're employed. So,
right.
It is funny in the Dresden version, you say with employing magic and Charity being able to do some sort of magic through her faith. Then I feel like it's portrayed that the White God and the angels and that whole aspect, that they are like a level above, some of the other gods, like, Vadaron. And the Never Never, even Mab. It seems like the gods are, like, Mab is on a level with an archangel, whereas the White God would be even above that.
Yeah, and, I brought a psalm that gets to some of these relationships, and it's Psalm 82, and it's short, so I'll just read it real quick. It says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. And then God asks the gods, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked, give justice to the weak and the orphan, maintain the right? No, how long will you do that? And then he says, give justice to the weak and the orphan, maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk around in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I say, you are gods, children of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die like mortals and fall like any prince. And then the psalmist adds, rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations belong to you. This idea that the White God is king of the gods, and in fact is creator of all of the other gods, is right here in the Psalms, and is picked up in different ways in the New Testament. And the reason for God's judgment of the other gods is that basically because the other gods are acting like the Fae. I mean, they're just causing havoc, and they're promoting wickedness and injustice. They're destroying the poor, and there's something about the White God being above all of this as creator of all of this in some ways, but also the one who's going to bring it all to rights at the end.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. I mean, that even in the Bible, God encounters other gods, so you have, I forget where it is in the Old Testament specifically, you may remember the story, but there's an instance where basically they're making sacrifices to see who believes in the true God. And so they're sacrificing to Baal, and then they sacrifice to, as we're using the Dresden verse example here, the white god basically, and you see the difference in power and the difference in the response of that. And so with the Dresden verse, they definitely bring in that thing where either way, regardless of how it pans out ultimately, or even if it is explained, the white god is something separate. Dresden says to himself or to somebody at one point that, if heaven exists, presumably it's in the never never, but nobody's ever been able to get there. So maybe it is entirely separate and it's a yet further dimension on, or maybe it's just so remote that they can't get to it. Because
I think this is just me. I think that like heaven or the white god's realm is like separate, like the outsiders are separate. That it's not a part of the never never. I think hell is a part of the never never, but not God, not God's realm.
Yeah, in Christian theology, we always make a distinction between the creation, which includes all things visible and invisible, and God. And God, in God's being, is always absolutely separate from creation. So if we're going to if we want to, try to employ Christian theological categories on the Dresden verse, then we can say something like, heaven, insofar as it is a creation of God, has to be somewhere in the creation, not separate from it. But if we mean heaven in terms of the quote-unquote the place where God is, then we have to see it as something completely uncreated and inaccessible to human beings. Because ultimately the Christian vision for the world isn't a group of bodiless souls being in heaven worshiping God. It is a group of resurrected bodies and souls living in a recreated heaven and earth, with bodies and relationships and everything else, eating from the tree of life forever. So it's a very tangible, physical kind of salvation that Christians hope for, and that's why it's okay for heaven to be kind of in the creation somewhere. But whether or not it's in the never never, if we go back into the Dresden verse, or just kind of on the other side of the never never, right before you get to the ontological divide where creation kind of ceases to be and it's just God on the other side. It's fascinating, and that's one of the reasons that I love the Dresden verse so much, is that it packs in, and we said before we started that maybe Butcher just was kind of pulling together things that he knew, not really, maybe perhaps doing a lot of more research on the religion than whatever he had coming into writing the books. But step after step, he anticipates the distinctives of Christian theology in ways that are profound and incredibly helpful.
I mean, if we consider how it is explained that Uriel has the power to destroy solar systems at a mere thought, at a whim. But he doesn't. But how powerful God is in the Dresden universe, and then he's basically decreed, we're not going to interfere. They have free will. Let them do what they want. And then that also means that a lot of bad things can happen, but it explains how something as powerful as God exists in that world, yet does not stop evil things, because it's all about everyone has free will to do what they choose.
I think that's
very interesting.
I think pretty much all of the most powerful beings in this fiction have no free will, right? I can't think of any extremely powerful being that has free will.
I feel
all
like
powerful
Vanaron
beings have restrictions, but not all of them have no free will.
I can't think of one that does.
We don't know the limits of Vanaron.
I mean, from what's been presented to us.
I feel like I get the impression that maybe Vadaron is restricted, but he has like free will.
I don't think he's as powerful as maybe some of the things we're talking about.
He's Odin.
You're going to have to define powerful being then.
Like Uriel. Maybe the more powerful you get, the less free will you have.
Oh yeah, Butcher definitely does that.
Yeah.
So
they're very
the
bound.
mothers are the most powerful fairies, and yet they have the least ability to use it. That's his thing. Like the more powerful you are, the more restrictions you are. But powerful beings, you have to put a definition there if we're going to discuss that. So on restrictions, I think we should move to relics and what they can do, what they can't do, how they might work, what's their history, and all sorts of things. Like, let's start with the ones that we found, newly found, in Skin Game that Harry stole from the Vault of Hades. Sort of.
Right. So, I mean, to list them real quick, I'm sure everybody's roughly familiar, but we have the real Shroud of Turin, presumably, the Holy Grail being the cup that Jesus drank from at the Last Supper. The knife, which my personal theory is that it's, as I was referring to before the show, it's the sword or the spear of destiny, which is, what they called it in Constantine and a few other pop culture references, but it's the spear that pierced Jesus' side on the cross, presumably. Then the circlet of thorny branches is the crown of thorns. And then, not one of the things you got there, but you've got listed the nails here. So,
quick question. You said the Holy Grail is the cup that he drank at the Last Supper. I thought it was the cup that caught his blood as he was being crucified.
That's a good question, actually. So
I think it's both. I think it's both. And that would tie in the communion, the sacramental imagery, because Jesus offers this cup and says, "This is my blood of the new covenant, given for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins." And then, according to the legend, that same cup is then used to catch the blood and water that comes out of Jesus' side. And that just kind of brings that sacramental imagery full circle, because in a spiritual reading of that, the blood that comes out is what shows up on communion tables every Sunday in Christian churches, and the water that comes out is the water that we're baptized in. So it's an intimate connection with the body of Christ.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I hadn't connected. I wasn't even thinking about the cup caught his blood. I vaguely remember that, but I hadn't connected those two things so fully.
Do not know where I got that idea. It's probably Indiana Jones, but I cannot say for certain.
I was going to say, because it all goes back, and I thought that's what I was thinking, was that this is the cup that he drank out of, because they talk about that, but apparently I forgot the other piece, so...
Yeah, in medieval paintings and stuff, you have angels holding the grail, catching the blood and water coming out of Jesus' side. And so, I mean, it's at least it's a part of the Christian tradition, if only kind of mainly an iconographic part of the Christian tradition, meant to evoke references in the story and evoke devotion when it comes to receiving Holy Communion. But yeah, no, it's all about how Christians receive the grace of God, and the image of the Holy Grail connects the Jesus's blood on the cross with what we do on a Sunday morning, which is sometimes why it's so ornate in the pictures.
And the Holy Grail, according to Indiana Jones, if you drink from it, you get eternal life, correct?
Which
that's what it says in Indiana Jones, yeah.
Yeah, but in a way, I mean, there's legends along those lines anyway, right? I mean, the Knights Templar were looking for the Grail for a lot longer than Indy was. So, from what I remember, anyway.
Yeah, and then Arthurian legend also deals with the Holy Grail, but I know even less about Arthur, so we're gonna have to do a lot more research on that part.
Right.
But
yeah, so
I actually got that whole blood from the cup was used for blood. I remember that from an Tales from the Crypt movie, Demon Knight.
we're awful. We're using all of our pop culture references to justify it. But part of what we were talking about, how Butcher brings in what he knows, is that like maybe he really was thinking Indiana Jones when he put down some of these artifacts, because he's like, well, okay, so the Grail's going to be there because I watched Indiana Jones like 2 days ago. So what are the other artifacts going to be? And the part that is interesting is that all of these artifacts are tied to the crucifixion.
Right.
So how does that actually apply in the Dresden verse? Because we see the swords have been turned into powerful weapons, but even though they're more a defensive nature, they are still swords. And so Harry always sees them as a weapon more so than how the knights employ them to ward off evil creatures. Sometimes that means cutting them, things like that, where I have no idea what they would use the crown of thorns for.
On
the spear
that subject, can somebody explain the story of the Circlet of Thorny Branches? It's like, so he's wearing it when he's crucified.
I'm sure Jason can.
I hope so.
I'll give it a shot.
But, like, who told him to wear it? Or whatever?
It was forced on him. So he faced trial before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. And Pilate wanted to free him, but the religious leaders thought he was too much of a threat. So Pilate said, well, we'll have him beaten. And so he has Jesus scourged. The soldiers mock him, because the claim that the religious leaders had brought was that Jesus was claiming to be the king of the Jews, and any kind of kingship was a direct affront to Caesar's rule in Israel. So they were trying to make this argument that Jesus was being a traitor to Roman rule. And so the Roman soldiers then mock him. They put a purple robe on him, which is royal colors. They pull together these thorns into a crown and shove it down on his head in mockery of a king's crown. And I think it's then that Pilate comes back and says, I've beaten him, and is that enough? And no, the religious leaders incite the crowd and they yell, crucify him. And Pilate washes his hands of what's going on, and then Jesus is led to the Mount of Golgotha and crucified.
Okay, so now we have like the basics of the history of, I think, pretty much everything. We know what the shroud is, and the knife seems kind of obvious, but what do we think they're going to do in the Dresden verse? Like, what's their gadget going to be and their effects? And let's get nerdy about this.
Well, so the Shroud of Turin's a +5 cloak of resistance, obviously. I mean, that's the problem, is that like we vaguely know what some of their historic, and faith-based properties are. The Shroud of Turin, heals the sick, and Marcone steals it with the intent of hoping to bring Persephone out of her coma. And interestingly, like the Spear of Destiny, the only real pop culture that immediately comes to mind is Constantine, we referenced earlier, but I think they bring it up a little bit in Hellboy as well, where the whole mystic and why this comes up is that Hitler was running around and collecting artifacts and things like that during World War II. But the Spear of Destiny is supposed to grant like more supernatural, indestructible things. That was how it manifested itself in Constantine, but who knows? The cup is supposed to give you eternal life, and from Indiana Jones, it's it heals you. You pour water on a wound, and the wound gets healed. Things like that. But many of these things have overlapping powers, and that's the part where I don't understand. But the more interesting thing is to look at them from a Chichen Itza kind of perspective, where Chichen Itza had all of these metaphysical. What did they call them? They were metacapacitors, right? And they were used in rituals. So instead of them being literally, Dresden's going to show up with the what am I thinking? From Harry Potter, the Deathly Hallows, right? Instead of using these things conjunction to become immortal and the greatest wizard that's ever been or whatever, he's going to use them in some kind of crazy, huge ritual, is kind of, what I anticipate. So, and that's what makes it hard for me to even conjecture. So
yeah, I mean, if you put him in that way, it sounds like being crucified is a ritual. which I don't think is wrong for the theology, but I really don't know. And then, like, is someone going to be crucified and go through a similar apotheosis?
That would be fascinating.
We also have, like, Dark Hollow is just kind of sitting out there. He knows how to do it. Is he ever gonna? Ooh, but, like, maybe that's a similar thing.
Wait, that's a really interesting... Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. It was just, do we have any indication that Harry plans to do anything with them, other than keep them out of the hands of the Denarians?
Not as of yet.
The indication was his talk with Hades, that every time during an age, a hero needs to come and collect these artifacts, and it's not necessarily just to keep them safe. The Denarians were trying to get in, but it seemed like it was put forth that it was more like, it really kind of was more like somebody else's idea, or that Nicodemus had the idea but not the means to do it, and so he was given the means to do it, but only as a way to get Dresden in there to get at the artifacts. Because the whole ordeal is the way to get the hero in there to prove himself, from Hades' discourse with Harry. That's kind of what I remembered. So Harry had no intent and still doesn't. However, the powers that be, quote unquote, like Mab and Hades and people on their scale, they seem to think so. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the nails are turned into swords, it's a complete set, right? I feel like it's one of those awesome armor sets from WoW.
Right. So we've got the headgear, we've got the cloak, we've got the spear, we've got the cup. So that goes in the trinket slot, right?
So I don't see enough gigantic pauldrons.
Right. Not nearly enough.
Don't you pretend to no gigantic pauldrons? They make me feel very special when I play World of Warcraft.
Yeah, but I don't see them yet. Are they going to come?
And unless they melt down the three swords into one really big one or something like that, we're still missing some pieces.
Well, I think it would be an interesting discussion to go back to saying that they might be trying to emulate the crucifixion. You guys think that's possible?
We did get, when he was talking with Hades and we felt the magic, basically, to boil it down, we got the impression that these weapons were like super nukes, like extremely powerful magical weapons. You think are the nails, the swords, are they on par with that, each sword? Are they also these massively powerful, on that level, weapons? I mean... Now that I think about it, I guess they are. I just never really thought they were on that scale.
Maybe it's kind of an effective exposure since we see them every few books that these are common things, and so we expect
one stands in the umbrella stand for years.
Yeah, so it's we don't get to see the giant amount of awesomeness that we haven't seen yet, so we don't think it's there. I hope that made sense.
That makes perfect sense.
Good.
I mean, one of them becomes a lightsaber. And, one way to look at that is that Butters is somehow activated by Butters' faith. The other way to look at it is that by the providence of the White God, this has fallen to his chosen instrument. And we don't need metal here. We can become a sword just fine.
Right. I mean, in a sense, it's a lightsaber, to use Jim or whoever it was in one of his Q&As called it a right saber. It's instead of being powered by plasma and electricity, it is literally powered by faith. Both Butters and the faith that has been stored in the sword for all this time. Used in the right way, it is a super nuke in the sense that over time it will do that kind of damage to the evil powers that it confronts. But at never at any point is somebody going to drop it out of a B-52 and level a city, because that's not the kind of power that it is. To extend the pop culture references a little bit further, if you watched Pacific Rim, they talk about how the Jaegers were the power of nuclear weapons, but they were small, focused nuclear weapons that they went and fought the kaiju or whatever. So the sword is that kind of power. It's just not to be used in a mass destructive kind of way. It has got a very specific use. Like, what you got to ask yourself is, how powerful would it be in the presence of, the Denarians, as we've seen, or in the presence of Lucifer, or the denizens of literally hell instead of just fallen angels, So then you would see their real power come out and play.
And we have the obvious, like, what is the restriction of, like, as evidence with Murphy in Skin Game? It seems like the nails, when they're used as a weapon, they have to be personal, and they have to be a right saber instead of just a basic weapon. So I expect there's going to be something similar as a restriction for all of the other items as well, but I don't know what they might be.
The swords are very much anti the whole might makes right thing. You cannot use them as however you see fit. They're very restrictive. Only in the service of good, not for example, like when Nicodemus surrenders, even though it's obvious, it's to everyone that he's bullshitting, and he has no intention of surrendering, but he does surrender, and then you can't use the sword, which is just really frustrating.
Right. That's where chaotic good comes in instead of lawful good, because chaotic good is the guy who gets the job done when the lawful evil guy is begging for forgiveness. But so with Butter's thing, what's interesting to me is it's both more and less powerful, and I think they talk about that either in the book or maybe Butcher brought it up, is that used for its purpose, it's as powerful or even more powerful than any of the other swords ever were, but you would never be able to use it inappropriately. At least the other swords at the end of the day are still physical steel. They still could be used against fairies or things like that. So in a way, Fidlacius is now, it was Fidlacius, wasn't it? Yeah, so Fidlacius is less powerful in that sense, that Butters can't just go into the Never Never and start cutting on fairies. But, presumably it makes up for that in other ways when it's employed the way that it's for its purpose, for what
it makes up for it by being a lightsaber.
it transformed into coolness points.
You can just be like, yeah, got a lightsaber. What? Bring it. Come on.
So, what would this crown of thorny branches do as an effect, and what would its restrictions be?
You can give your enemies a very big headache.
Just force them to wear it, and then they have a headache. Ooh.
Yeah, here you go. Aha, got you. I don't know. Is there any basis at all in anything? Do we know what its powers might be? I have no idea.
Jason, do you have any conjecture to offer? I mean, I have some, but
I would think that most of the relics that the church still has, I don't know if it includes the crown of thorns, but most of them are employed by the faithful as points of prayer for healing or some kind of special intervention. So for instance, they actually dug down under the Vatican and took a sample from the body under there, and it turns out to be a 2,000-year-old corpse of a Jewish man, right in the same time period as St. Peter, who the Vatican has said has been buried under there for such a long time. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, the standard way we'd think about it is in terms of a focus for prayer and healing, but if it was employed as a weapon, trying to think, even some of the, you could probably make a claim for mind control, or some kind of spiritual torture, but I think that would be counter its purpose.
Right, and I think it's important to go back to the fact that we're seeing this through Harry's eyes, and so Harry sees everything as a weapon per se. Like immediately upon dropping a sword, he picks it up and tries to employ it as a weapon, whether that was its purpose or not. So in a way, it's Harry's own ignorance of the purpose, and so we see them as a weapon because that's how Harry saw them. But I imagine they will come out to be something else. You know, I mean, if we take the fantasy side a little bit more, then helms are also, you know, protective against mind magic, which was sort of important at Chichen Itza. And so, you know, he had Bob shield Murphy, and so between the sword and Bob, Murphy was able to run around against 13 of the Lords of Outer Night, for example. And so maybe it's something like that, you know, but our inner nerd is like, well, there's 5 of them, right? So there's a synergy bonus, and it'll give you an extra +2 to whatever. And Harry sees them all as, Andreas said, where they're all mini nukes. You know, they're all weapons. And you know, to borrow from Bob a little bit, all that proves is that they're immensely powerful, and the only thing Harry knows how to do is to break them to let the energy out. You know, which would be catastrophic. So, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. So.
Do each of them represent a part of a person, like the way the 5 points of magic?
Shroud is for the face, Grail's for the mouth, Knife is for the side, Thorny Branch is for the head. Nails are wrists and ankles.
But like the 5 points of magic of like the earth, wind, fire, water, and then
but
soul,
the
spirit,
5 points of magic could also be, you know, a human body.
Yeah,
like, you know, like.
But it's like thinking of the way potions work, that there was an element for each specific part of a person as it's being affected, like one for your mind, one for your sense of sight, your smell. Is there kind of synergy in that way?
Could be.
Well, and it's a necessity, but the 5 points and the five items, that's a super good connection. That's very interesting, actually. So,
it makes me wonder if we're going to start exploring the magic of the White God, the faith magic, more in future books. Because now if we have things of real power out there, and we're trying to figure out how
also,
they are going to be employed,
we have missed one. I forgot it. It's all my fault. There's an item that was taken that is described as an ancient wooden placard, because we only have 4 on our notes right now, and there has to be 5. And what is this? What is this ancient wooden placard?
If it has to do with
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I forgot about that too. If it has to do with the crucifixion, then it will be the sign that has, in 3 different languages, Jesus Christ, King of the Jews, which was attached to the top of the cross as a way to mock Christ as he suffered.
As all the others have been crucifixion related, let's assume then that's probably true. That's what it is. What powers would that have?
The telling people off powers.
Snark powers.
That's right.
I shall snark you to death.
Being a priest, I know the power of snark. I'm often the recipient of it.
So what do we think the real Shroud will be able to do? There's the obvious connection is that sometime Marcone is going to bring Persephone back from her coma. But like, is there something else about it that maybe it'll do or not be able to do?
I mean, do we think it has like that's the assumption, it has kind of healing properties, right? Some sort.
Yeah, I mean, because the shroud itself is meant to be the cloth that was covering Jesus's face at the time of the resurrection. Mm-hmm. And that Jesus's resurrected body passes through it and leaves something behind.
Like an imprint, like an imprint of Jesus on the shroud or something, right?
Right.
It's supposed to be.
So is someone going to get crucified and then die, obviously, and then get brought back to life? I volunteer Michael.
Wait, so we came back to this?
Yeah. Wait, it's been like 20 minutes worth of speculating on the D&D/WoW powers of 5 holy artifacts, so yeah.
Well, I, personally, and maybe Jason can speak better to this, but I mean, the crucifixion it's as far as I understand it, from a religious perspective, it was part of the plan, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't just the Romans. Well, from a human perspective, it was the Romans deciding we're going to do this, but it was all part of God's plan. So it would have to be part of God's plan, and unless God is planning to, well, I'll just keep going on with my rambling. Unless God is planning to have someone be crucified, I don't think it would happen.
I mean, I don't think the Romans particularly wanted to crucify Jesus. They were actually trying to be like, can we, we don't want to do this. Can we give him a way out? And then they kept trying to appease these religious leaders, but they were having none of it. It was more the religious leaders who were trying to get Jesus killed.
Yeah, and that really differs from gospel to gospel. So the Gospel of Mark has more emphasis on Jesus's threat to Roman rule in the area, whereas some of the other gospels focus more on the religious rulers. But you're right, Alex, in terms of it's part of the plan. So St. Paul can talk about the lamb who was slain from before the foundations of the world. That somehow in about 33 AD, something happens in space and time that has eternal repercussions, and that it was part of God's plan for the reconciliation of the world to God, and the reconciliation of the world to itself, and ultimately the salvation of the world. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, there was this idea that as the time came closer and closer to the crucifixion, because of entropy, the world was winding down and the world was close to winking out of existence. And it's at that nadir of the creation that the Son of God becomes a human being, lives and walks among us, is killed, takes part in the dying of creation, and then in the resurrection pulls creation up into a newness of life. So the arc is down until the cross, where the creation is slowly winding down, but it is now on its way up into what it will be for until time shall be no more.
That sounds a lot like this thing might be the big apocalyptic trilogy that's coming in a few books that we've also been speculating as being very much like Ragnarok, which has everything is dying, and then there's, at the end of it, there's a new creation. I volunteer Michael for Jesus.
It also sounded very Aslan out of Narnia-ish.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was intentional.
Yeah, so just to be clear, since for Andreas especially, so Narnia was written by somebody as basically, another way to tell the Christian mythology and that sort of thing. So Jason, maybe you have a better perspective on it, but I mean, that Aslan was meant to be Jesus, so.
Right, exactly.
I think I've heard that, yeah, but I didn't really connect it. I just thought it sounded very like out of Narnia. But
yeah, that's
now
right.
that you say it, I think I have heard that before, that it was written kind of based on Christian mythos and be a different story of the same story.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because C.S. Lewis, the guy who wrote that, he wrote an essay called "Myth Become Fact," and he was talking about all the people who pointed out that in ancient mythology there's all these stories of dying and rising gods and whatever else, and he said the thing that distinguishes this story of Christ's crucifixion is that all of those stories of dying and rising gods happen in some time that's not time. But the Christian story is that these myths have become facts and entered the world in a way that is real and tangible and has actual effects in the world. So I think that's another reason that I dig the Dresden stuff so much, because it plays in that same kind of mythical water, and just assumes the facts of like crucifixion and resurrection, and the fact that there's this transcendent white God that we don't know what to do with, and then proceeds to ignore them and live in the same world with them, but ignore them.
Temporarily kind of pivoting, and this is maybe going against what we had planned, but I think it's a really interesting really interesting parallel, right? If the crucifixion is part of God's plan, and if we could say for a moment that becoming the Son of God is like assuming a mantle, isn't it interesting that Harry assuming the winter mantle was all part of Mab's plan, possibly from his birth? His whole entire life possibly could have been about becoming the Winter Knight, and that's
you
a really
mean Mab, the Queen of Air and Darkness, or Margaret,
Mab,
or both?
Mab's plan,
Okay.
completely Mab's plan.
I
And
think
whether
maybe she planned that from since Harry was born, but I feel like more she's just like pragmatic and saw a chance.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I think there's some seeds there, right? There's
I
some.
mean, we know Matt is a schemer, but I also think he's very pragmatic and very good at taking like, opportunities when she sees them.
Well, I think the proof is that is. I mean, I agree with you. It's possible that she was just being pragmatic, but there is some possibility that it was from birth because of the deal that was made. You know, to make Leia the godmother. Excuse me.
And there's something weird going on with the fact that Mab's second choice after Harry was Thomas, which is another one of Margaret's sons. That seems like a different topic, and we're at an hour or so we should get the last comments in and then tie everything up soon. It's like, so what is this knife gonna do? Because like
You're
in
just
Constantine,
obsessed.
I want to know.
What was the knife used for in the crucifixion?
They pierced his side. So
Yeah.
It's a spear, right? And then there's a knife because it's a spearhead. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
right,
Yeah,
that's the assumption. Nobody actually says that in Skin Game, but that's the only thing that makes
It's the
sense.
assumption we are working on, yeah.
It's the same thing with the placard. Like, it's the only thing that we can make sense of. But, you know, considering we've got the Holy Grail and the Crown of Thorns, those two we know for sure. There was the Shroud of Turin, obviously. So those three we know for sure. The other two are kind of question marks that we filled in on ourselves because we roughly know, like, in that story, what is missing / what.
Sorry, what was
Again,
the other two?
So the two being the knife, quote unquote, and the placard.
I can just see it now. Him taking, like, really just messing with us, and it's like, well, yeah, those three were crucifixion related, but no, the placard, you know, he was like, Jesus was a carpenter. Yeah, that was his first work. Just like that was his first thing he made.
So I mean, what I know of this hopeful spear of destiny, I guess, is like in Constantine, it was supposed to bring about and letting Son of Satan run around through the world and stuff and do utter chaos, which is cool. But I don't think he's going to go that route. But if it was a spearhead, he can just tie it to his wizard staff, and you get another spear. That's a wizard staff. That's what I'm guessing is going to happen.
It could be. So, yeah, I mean, so part of my hesitation with trying to predict it is that I don't make any pretenses that I'm half as clever as Butcher is. Like, I know some of the stories and I know some of what's going on. We've discussed how it's Harry's perspective, this, and how, you know, what some of the actual, like, literal dogma is for these artifacts and that sort of thing. But as Jason pointed out earlier, the way that we're thinking about them as weapons is kind of counter to their intended purpose, or, you know, idealized purpose and that sort of thing. So, you know, I anticipate Butcher's got to have some way out of it, because otherwise it feels like he painted himself into a corner somehow. You know, so there is some kind of plan, but speculating is hard because I'm on the rails, man. It's a ride. I don't know. It's going to go left or up or down, or I'm upside down. I don't know, but it's that way.
Weapons can be used for a variety of purposes.
Yeah, and I'm going to quote Michael in Skin Game. Like, everyone is thinking that the important word in Sword of Faith is sword. Sure, they're weapons. They can also be other things. We'll just have to find out what. Yeah. All right, ending announcements, I guess. Again, move to the new website, new iTunes, because everything else is going to die this month.
Pretty important.
What is the new website?
brokenjars.xyz-dresden/podcast/files.
Just
I don't know. Yeah,
also, if you can't, the old feed should have an updated description to say it's the old feed, but if you can't figure it out, you can get that feed, the new feed, at brokenjar.xyz. Very important, because if you're following the old feed on your podcast app or iTunes, you will not continue to get episodes unless you resubscribe.
I mean, I've been doing the past episodes up until now, but this is going to be the last episode put on the old stuff.
Oh.
Everything from new stuff is going to have to get, because we're going to do Halloween next, and the Halloween is the day they die. So,
well, we should probably put the Halloween one on the old feed too.
I don't know, but then I'm going to shut it down. So it's like, I don't know.
Also, I'm really proud of us for getting through an entire episode about religion without hopefully offending. Jason, do you think we offended any religious peoples?
Oh, I'm sure we did.
Oh.
I'm sure we did. That's okay.
I do think this is the first episode that we didn't swear.
Fuck.
I know.
All right.
I thought it was fucking amazing myself.
Got ya.
Okay, so other things, like check out our other podcasts, like Jason's Brothers stuff, which is 42 and High Fantasy with me, and Great Scott about The Office, and then
I think that's it. Check us out on Twitch. There's some, and also on YouTube for what's my YouTube? Shylex Gaming. We used to do a podcast, but there's also stream footage from some games. So
and there's Dangerous to Go Alone, which I still have not really checked out. It's bad on me, but and then Andreas has his streaming thing.
I have a stream. I don't stream that much right now because my computer is being wonky, but Twitch TV/Lord Batty.
Lord Batty. All right. I think that's it. I hope it's it, because I'm going to shut it down now. So everyone say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.